Do you remember when you could ride your bike across 3 blocks, walk into a neighbor's house without knocking, and end the day with a movie that no studio had ever polished? That wasn't fantasy. That was California in the 1970s. In this video, we're going to look at 7 things we lost from that decadepieces of everyday life, culture, and freedom that may never return. Back then, everything felt a little looser. The edges weren't sharp, the music wasn't overproduced, the neighborhoods weren't locked, the ideas weren't filtered, and somehow, even the quiet moments waiting for your film to develop, flipping through vinyl in a record shop, hearing your parents laugh at something on the radio felt full of meaning. Not because they were perfect, but because they were real, uncurated, and lived without rush. In the back rooms of small theaters, behind coffee shops and bookstores, California cinema in the 1970s came alive in its rawest form. There were no franchises, no algorithms, no guarantees of success. What there was instead was freedom. Directors weren't executives. They were rebels. People like Hal Ashby, John Cassavetes, and a young Martin Scorsese weren't making films to sell toys or open weekends. They were capturing human stories, messy, intimate, unresolved. A man walking the streets of Los Angeles at midnight. A woman falling apart in silence. A political idea tucked into a conversation over coffee. These weren't stories designed to entertain. They were stories meant to be felt. California became a home for that kind of filmmaking, not just in Hollywood, but in San Francisco, Berkeley, Venice. Independent producers rented cameras, begged for locations, and shot on real streets with real people. Films like Two-Lane Blacktop, Chinatown, and The Last Detail weren't polished. They were alive. Every frame felt like a risk. Studios eventually took notice, and by the end of the decade, the age of blockbusters began. The freedom that had defined the early 70s started to shrink. Budgets grew. Expectations hardened. Filmmaking became safer. But for a brief, flickering moment, California was the beating heart of something honest, something imperfect, and maybe because of that, unforgettable. Do you remember the first time a film didn't give you answers but stayed with you anyway? That's what these stories did. Not just for critics, not just for artists. For everyone who ever sat in the dark and saw something they couldn't explain. Do you remember when a sidewalk felt like your entire world and you never needed permission to explore it? In 1970s California, the neighborhood was your playground, your safety net, and your social life. Not because it was designed that way, but because people trusted each other. You didn't need a gate. You didn't need a code. You needed a bike. You'd ride past unlocked doors, wave to neighbors on their porches, and cut through someone's backyard without thinking twice. Nobody called it trespassing. It was just understood. You belonged. Parents didn't track your location. They didn't worry if you disappeared for hours. Be home when the streetlights come on was all they said. And you listened. Not because you feared the world, but because you knew it was good to come back to. Block parties weren't events you planned weeks in advance. They just happened. Someone rolled out a grill. Kids grabbed chalk and drew on the driveway. Radios played whatever was on, and someone always knew how to fix your bike chain if it popped off. It was casual. It was chaotic. It was community. And maybe the most remarkable part is what was missing. No high fences, no cameras, no panic. People watched each other's kids, held each other's spare keys, and showed up when it mattered. Trust wasn't optional. It was the glue. What would it take today to feel that kind of ease on your own street? Not just knowing your neighbors, but relying on them. Because back then, home wasn't just inside your house. It was everything from the cracked pavement to the backyard tree you swore was the tallest in the world. Have you ever stood so close to a stage you could feel the floor vibrate and the music wasn't famous yet, just real? That was California in the 1970s. It wasn't about concerts, it was about rooms. Rooms that pulsed with sound, smoke, and something electric you couldn't explain. Back then, the music didn't come through curated playlists or sponsored tours. It came from garages, dive bars, community centers. Bands like the Eagles, Fleetwood Mac, and Tom Petty were still figuring it out. Punk was exploding in San Francisco's Mabuhay Gardens and LA's Mask. Jazz poured out of basements in Oakland. Folk thrived in Santa Cruz. Every city had its sound, and it wasn't asking for approval. There was no formula. The music wasn't polished, but it was honest. Mistakes were part of the show. Lyrics changed on the fly. Guitars squealed when they weren't supposed to. But people kept coming back because it felt like something was being born in front of them. You didn't need a wristband or a QR code. You just needed to know someone or be willing to show up. $5 at the door, maybe one drink ticket, and a night you never forgot. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about image. It was about sound that shook your ribs and lyrics that made you look inward. Even the audience felt like part of the band. You weren't watching from a distance. You were in it. What's the last song you heard live that made you feel like the world was suddenly wider or closer? Because in the 70s, California didn't just listen to music, it lived inside it. There were no medals, no sponsorships, no judges. In the California of the 1970s, skateboarding wasn't a sport, it was rebellion on wheels. Born out of drought-dried swimming pools in places like Dogtown, it was a movement carved from concrete and instinct. Skaters didn't ask for permission. They dropped into empty pools, rode curbs like surfboards, and turned sidewalks into playgrounds. It was fast, loud, and unpredictable. They wore Vans because they stuck to the board. They wore scrapes like trophies. No one had to tell them what they were doing was new. They could feel it. Photographers like Hugh Holland captured the blur of it all: sunlight, sweat, and the shadow of a board mid-air. There were no helmets, no uniforms, just cut-off shorts, tube socks, and the constant sound of wheels on pavement. And around every corner, a new line to try, a new stair to jump, a new chance to fall and get back up. What kind of freedom pushes someone to keep going after the fourth, fifth, or sixth fall? For these kids, it wasn't about proving something to the world. It was about proving something to themselves. Over time, skateboarding got its rules, its circuits, its trophies. But something in the rawness of that first wave, something wild and unfiltered, had left behind. It wasn't about being the best. It was about being there. On the street, on the board, in the moment. No filters, no angles. Just the hum of your wheels and the next piece of concrete daring you to try again. They hadn't given up yet. Not entirely. In the 1970s, California still pulsed with the hope that everything could be reimagined: family, work, education, even love. The 60s had cracked the surface. The 70s tried to build something new through it. Communes flourished in rural valleys and coastal hillsides. People grew their own food, raised each other's kids, and wrote manifestos by candlelight. It wasn't about escaping society. It was about rewriting it. You'd walk into a shared house in Berkeley or Santa Cruz and find philosophy books stacked beside jars of honey and piles of hand-woven blankets. Women's collectives opened bookstores and health centers. Civil rights organizers shifted focus to economic justice and education. LGBTQ+ activists claimed new spaces in San Francisco, creating communities that offered safety, identity, and belonging. The revolution hadn't vanished. It had simply changed shape. People asked questions that still echo today. What does a life look like when it's built around values, not profit? What happens when you refuse to compromise? Of course, not everything worked. Idealism clashed with logistics. Some dreams collapsed under their own weight. But what mattered was that people tried. They risked comfort for possibility. They believed, even in the middle of economic uncertainty and political distrust, that something better could be built. Today, much of that energy has been absorbed or quieted. It's been renamed as lifestyle or reduced to hashtags. But back then, it was raw, daily effort. It was messy. It was brave. There was a time when you didn't have to be wealthy to live near the water in California. The beach wasn't gated. The view didn't come with a mortgage the size of a fortune. Places like Venice, Santa Cruz, and Laguna Beach felt open economically, socially, spiritually. You could rent a place 3 blocks from the sand with a couple of roommates and a part-time job. Artists set up studios in old garages. Musicians played barefoot on street corners. Surfers worked odd shifts so they could catch morning waves and still afford a burrito afterward. The line between tourists and locals didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a dance. Cafes weren't curated. Shops sold handmade crafts. Galleries hung up paintings that didn't match the furniture. People talked to each other in line, swapped books, invited strangers to jam in backyard circles. There was time to linger, to watch the sunset without taking a photo, to let a whole day pass without checking a single device. What happens to a place when living near beauty becomes a luxury instead of a right? That shift didn't happen all at once. Rents crept up. The creatives moved inland. Chain stores replaced corner markets. And slowly, that untamed edge the grit mixed with grace started to disappear. The ocean's still there. The sand still burns your feet in August. But something about the people, the rhythm, the freedom, it's changed. What we lost wasn't just access. We lost a feeling. The sense that the coast belonged to everyone, not just the few who could afford to claim it. Analog life at human speed. Do you remember what it felt like to wait? To let something unfold slowly, with no way to skip ahead, no instant results, no constant alerts buzzing in your pocket. In 1970s California, life moved at a different rhythm. Not because people were behind, but because the world was still built around patience. You dialed numbers by spinning them. You wrote letters and waited days for replies. You dropped film off at the photo lab and picked it up a week later, hoping for just one perfect shot. There was no cloud storage. Your memories lived in shoeboxes. No GPS, only folded maps in the glove compartment. No playlists, just mixtapes made with love, one track at a time, recorded straight from the radio. If you missed a show, you missed it. If you got lost, you asked someone. And in all that slowness, there was space. Space to think, to notice, to connect. Conversations happened face to face. Eye contact meant something. You weren't reachable all the time, and that was normal. Expected. Even healthy. Technology hadn't taken over yet. It was useful, but it didn't demand your attention. The pace of life allowed room for boredom, and from that boredom came imagination. Kids built forts, not profiles. Friends knocked on your door, not your screen. We didn't call it analog. We just called it living. Some of it faded slowly. Some of it disappeared without warning. But whether you grew up in it, visited once, or only heard the stories, there was a version of California in the 1970s that felt wide open, alive, and deeply human. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that's what made it beautiful. Which of these moments do you remember or wish you could have lived? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your stories, your snapshots, your version of what's been lost. And if this video stirred something in you, even for a second, leave a like and a comment. It helps more than you know. The more people engage, the more YouTube shows this to others, who might need the same reminder that some things, even if they're gone, are still worth remembering. Thank you for being here. And wherever you are now, may a small part of that slower, softer California still live inside you.